Welcome to the Agents Angle, covering an industry veiled in secrecy and one which many want to see develop into a recognised profession, that of football agency. I'm Jonathan Booker.
And I'm Peter Paleologos. With agent applicants now preparing for the third of the new FIFA Football Agents exam, with the application window closing just 2 weeks ago, we examine the changing landscape for football agents and in particular agent developments which may have a key American influence.
And with that sporting influence from the US in mind, we discuss whether there could be evidence or seemingly logical explanation behind FIFA's approach and thought processes with the heavily criticised FFAR.
All that to come on this episode of The Agents Angle.
So we're in that period now where many agent applicants are heavily engrossed with FIFA football agent regulations, RSTP, safeguarding documents and other aspects of the now 705 pages of revision materials from FIFA in preparation for the 20-question exam. And we do, of course, wish them all the best with their exam in approximately 6 or 7 weeks' time on what I believe is the 22nd of May 2024 for the latest FIFA Agents exam.
Yes, I think I mentioned that 2 weeks ago, the registration window closed, actually 1 week ago. But in terms of the agents exam, I think this is a benchmark exam for me in many ways. My view is the first exam we saw a pass rate of just over 50%. The second exam was in the low 20%, although we don't know the definitive figure. So really, how is FIFA going to shape this third exam? I know from some people in the FIFA Football Agents Working Group and other stakeholders are pressuring FIFA not to be, I'll say, tough. There's also the language issue, which the Brazilian court case revealed that some National Association agent groupings are not happy with the languages only being 3. And also what's going on with the guidance provided to candidates regarding the suspended provisions of the FFAR, caps, compliance, etc. There's 9 or more. However, for our listeners who are candidates in this third exam, I wish all the best success. And I know several close colleagues sitting this May exam round very well. So good luck to them as well.
I think what we need above all is consistency with this exam, not constantly changing things back and forth, and actually focus on getting the languages available to those people who need it rather than making it harder or easier or whatever. But for all those who will be successful in sitting the next exam, as well as those who have already passed the exam and those who applied through the legacy pathway or the national law pathway, this is a very unpredictable industry at the moment. And in all honesty, we don't know what the future holds for football agents, agent regulations, or even the wider football landscape. And also with that in mind, what it means for FIFA. And just one aspect of that, which we touched on somewhat briefly in the previous episode of the Agents Angle, and one we thought it important to revisit, not least as it does have some key aspects for us to consider when it comes to football agents, is the Relevant case in the USA. As Peter highlighted on the last episode, this case is bound for the US Supreme Court now, and it also has even been mentioned by elements of President Biden's administration. But Peter, this is something you've been keeping an eye on for some time, and therefore, do you just quickly want to recap what the case is about, and importantly, the way this case could impact agent matters, not just in the US, but around the world as well?
Yes, we mentioned this case in the last episode, but I'll go for a little brief synopsis. I think we need to go back into the background. Basically, in September 2019, Relevant, they're a global promoter and organizer of friendly football matches, decided to seek La Liga permission to host a game in the US. And this game wasn't just a friendly, it was actually a game for points, Barcelona, Girona, I believe. However, at that time in 2018, FIFA had published a policy where foreign clubs were not allowed to play league games overseas, and in particular in the USA. So Relevant decided to issue a lawsuit against not just FIFA's policy, but the United States Soccer Federation's enforcement of FIFA's policy. It was a lengthy battle, which initially was won by the US Federation and FIFA. But then there was an appeal to the United States Court of Appeal, Second Circuit, and the lawsuit was revived. We've discussed this before with agents and competition law or restraint of trade, that the policy was seen as an agreement between competitors and restricted competition for official international football games in the US. So the Second Circuit Court, all three judges went in favor with Relevant. Now, where to from here? Basically, the USSF want to appeal. To appeal, you have to go to the Supreme Court, the final court of America. And the Supreme Court of the United States, first of all, they won't hear the case without basically taking up the case. So the first step is for them to take up the case. So 4 justices will need to say, yes, this is a case we want to hear. And that won't happen till later this year. You mentioned the Biden administration. Yes, they made a submission in the appeal. And they sided with the promoter, Relevant, who had filed the antitrust suit against FIFA and the US Soccer Federation, urging the Supreme Court to allow the case to proceed to trial. So that's very interesting. The Department of Justice, which is the department that's responsible for legal matters, sided with Relevance in their brief to the court. Now, what is the impact of this decision? How does it impact agents and football in general? Now, we know that this decision could have far-reaching consequences if it goes to Supreme Court and Relevant win the case there too. What is FIFA's authority to govern the game under US law? And where is that line for authority? We know that NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball do host competitive matches overseas in other countries. So that's an important point here where we're looking at La Liga having an official match in the US. If Relevant wins the case in the Supreme Court, it may have a far-reaching impact on FIFA's ability to enforce their bylaws around the world. And that is not just in relation to the hosting of matches, but also about creating caps on agent fees, looking at the training compensation and solidarity mechanism. All these issues could also be affected by a Supreme Court decision that is in favor of Relevance. So it's not just about a promotional match, but it's other issues which affect agents and players, Jonathan.
And also, that anti competitive element is what hinges a lot of the other challenges around the world at the moment as well. And we can't underestimate the growing American influence on the world of football nowadays. There have been false storms in the past for football, or should I say soccer in America, with the likes of the North American Soccer League. And with that, some may somewhat naively liken Messi going to the US with the moves of Pele, Best, Beckenbauer, Cruyff, Eusebio, Carlos Alberto, Gerd Muller, and Bobby Moore in the 70s. But there are a lot of other cultural, commercial, and financial differences now compared to them. And the MLS, for me, is a very, very different animal to the NASL. Not least with the huge financial footprint US financiers and owners have in football around the world and the growing soccer interest in America. Plus, of course, we have the American influence in the football agency world now, including the likes of CAA, which now encapsulates Base and Stella, WMG, Wasserman Media Group, and Rock Nation, amongst others. And on this topic, there was something that caught my attention in the last week or so, and that was the statement that Premier League games will be played in the USA in the next 10 years. And one of the reasons this particular comment caught my attention is that this wasn't from some speculative chancer trying to grab headlines, but one of the biggest names in the sports agent world, head of the LA 2028 Summer Olympics Organising Committee, and founder and chairman of WMG, Wasserman, or Team Vass as it is now referred, and that's Casey Wasserman. Should it happen? No, I don't think it should. A tournament pre-season, maybe, but not a European Cup match or English Premier League or Serie A or La Liga match or any other match for that matter. Could it happen? I would like to confidently say no, but the way things are going, I think it could, despite how much I hate the thought of it with me being a football traditionalist. After all, the English Premier League and the spectre of the 39th game hasn't really gone away in many, many years.
You're referring to an article, it's a recent article, 31st of March of this year, 2024. Now, Casey Wasserman is the founder of Wasserman or Team Was, sports and entertainment agency. And I'm not surprised that someone like Casey, whose agency represents some of the sport's biggest stars in our sport, including the Arsenal manager Mikel Arteta, has come out with this view that the English Premier League will be played in the United States, maybe within 10 years, maybe more, maybe less. He acknowledges that football is the most popular sport in the world and still has significant growth, especially in the North American market. It's a massive market. He also referred in the article to Messi and what Messi is doing for the MLS. And he will not be surprised that a Manchester United or Chelsea, as he mentioned in the article, be played in New York. Wasserman does acknowledge what happened with the Super League. There's a lot of fan bases opposed to this new Super League, which would hurt the Premier League or La Liga or the German Bundesliga. However, 10 years is a long time, and it is now an entertainment business. That's the flavor that Mr. Wasserman is emphasizing in this article and in his view. And anything can happen. The world's been changing dramatically in the last 10, 20 years. So we could see anything, Jonathan.
And one of those aspects is the extent it seems American ownership has developed. In fact, I'd say it crept up on us a bit. Yeah, maybe this realization of overseas ownership is what is prompting a lot of governments and fan groups in traditional footballing nations to look at national football governance bodies to safeguard football clubs as institutions, as we mentioned on the last episode with the independent football regulator in the UK.
I did a bit of research on the American ownership and had a look at Football Benchmark, which is one of those consulting companies that does research, a bit like Tifosi and some other companies out there. And currently, 20 clubs in the five big leagues in Europe have United States-based majority owners. Those clubs are spread through the five big leagues. So a lot of American ownership. I think second is the Chinese at 3 clubs. So there's a big difference there, Jonathan. The Americans are all about financial power, business acumen, and investment opportunities. And obviously, looking at Europe with all these big clubs, historic clubs, brands that have a big emphasis on Asia and other markets and Latin America, for the Americans, this is a no-brainer in terms of investment. Now, if you couple that with the agent side, and we've seen that the mega agencies in America also coming to the agent side, it is big business and it's an opportunity with the American influence always growing in the world game, being football. I also think that in terms of the agent side, and then we're an agent podcast, when the ECG, the European Court of Justice, makes a decision, I think the European Commission will look at the football business overall in terms of investment, in terms of ownership, as well as agents. I think they're all interrelated, especially if the European Court of Justice decision is not definitive and leaves an unclear space for clubs, players, fans, and agents. We all want certainty, we all want transparency going forward. And with all this investment, American or otherwise, with all these changes in the agent space, I think if the legal decisions leave a vague landscape, we will see more state law like we do have in Italy and France, especially. You mentioned the UK regulator. We may see more of that as well. And I heard that Spain might be the next, depending on what the outcome is with the European Court of Justice case that FIFA is involved in terms of German 2 cases, basically related to the caps and other matters. Spain could be next. The Spanish government, that is, if the European Court of Justice does not provide clarity in terms of regulations for agents, but also, I would say, the whole sort of football space.
Let's switch track now, albeit slightly, as this is something that also has a bit of an American edge to it. But an admission by me that I think stunned you a few weeks ago, Peter, and also a few other associates in the football and legal world who I shared this with. And this was a bit of an epiphany for me on the topic of FFAR. And I wasn't drinking at the time, and I don't want to promote conspiracy theories, but researching sports agents in the US compared to football agents, primarily in the UK and Europe, prompted this train of thought. Now, everyone knows how much I scrutinise what FIFA say and do, or don't do, as the case may be, when it comes to agent-related matters. But it may surprise some people that I am open to giving praise or understanding, especially when I am puzzled by FIFA's decisions and actions, however ludicrous they may seem to be. If not, look for a method in the madness. And despite from 2013 to 2015, I was hugely critical of RWWI, the regulations on working with intermediaries, and was one of those involved in the fight against those changes. I also had an epiphany several years ago in relation to those proposals and regulations and could actually see some logic there, primarily after doing a sport and corporate governance qualification. But that's in the past. I did write an article some 4 years ago on that for anyone who wants to look at it, which in summary highlights that the theory of FIFA behind RWWI may have actually been good, if not correct from a good governance perspective, and could have possibly worked. But the execution by FIFA back then, with the implementation of RWWI and the finer details, were ultimately flawed, in particular, that FIFA didn't ensure the national member associations upheld their responsibilities with intermediary regulations and licensing. And that is where I believe RWWI primarily failed. Hence, after several years of observing the FFAR debacle, I've recently had a similar epiphany. But not, I hasten to add, a thought that FIFA and their FFAR is a good approach or a logical one based on what has happened since roughly 2018. But with that said, I can possibly understand where some of the influences and thought processes of FIFA with FFAR may actually stem from, and that could be an American sports influence. Now, the lazy association we could make here with American sports is the matter of the cap. After all, this is the most scrutinised aspect of the FFAR, the cap on agent commissions. But personally, I think it's a bit more nuanced than that, and we have discussed that before on the agents angle, not least as some, including FIFA representatives, have used the US capping argument on agents as a justification for the cap in FFAR, which in my mind is frankly rubbish for so many reasons and in so many ways, as it's often like comparing apples and oranges. However, in the US, what we see as the role of a sports agent or football agent in Europe and elsewhere is often split into two areas and two different roles. You have the agents and then you have the talent managers, for which the agent is capped in many cases, but the talent manager isn't. The agent deals with the contract, player, and sporting elements, whilst the talent manager deals with a lot of the more commercial and lifestyle elements. The agents are licensed and quite heavily regulated, but the talent managers less so. And that is somewhat a very basic, if not crude, summation. So I apologize to our American listeners for that. But if we take a look at the FFAR and the cap in particular, we have two main elements. We have agent services, which are capped and largely covered by the regulations, but also other services which aren't covered under the cap or so much by the regulations, which is an aspect that at times FIFA has used almost as an excuse to try and distract from the capping element and say they aren't restricting agents at 3%, 6%, 10%, or whatever it may be, but that agents can earn from these other services, which is right, but is also potentially a risky aspect to seemingly encourage. Now, as I've said before, I have been searching for the logic and influences of FIFA with this approach and the FFAR, with such things as the cap, which I think a lot of people have, not least their persistence and unwillingness to try and negotiate and try and find some middle ground, rather than all the disputes, time wasting, confusion, and legal costs. I don't want to give FIFA an excuse for their thinking with FFAR, as I think they've had enough time to find this reasoning themselves and explain it, rather than continue digging in the hole they've dug for themselves. But I think this aspect and this potential American influence is something worth considering.
Some excellent points there, Jonathan. Just in terms of FFAR and basically what FIFA says. FIFA says that the FFAR ensures that agents no longer have extreme financial incentives to accelerate transfer movement, and thereby they link the service fee of an agent to the salary of a client. FIFA ensures that the interests of the agent and their client is fully aligned based on that. However, you mentioned other services. Endorsements, marketing deals are outside FIFA's remit. There are other services. So with agents facing the cap on their commission, the motivation that FIFA says is for agents to make up any shortfall by searching for more commercial opportunities for their clients. Now, I actually think you're onto something, Jonathan, because the US or the American influence is there, and maybe that's the philosophy why they prepare the cap this way. But I think going forward, there's going to be more influence in the US sports. And I'll just go into it, what I'm thinking here and my view of why FIFA is looking more and more at the American experience, because we know sports agencies pretty much started in America. The endorsements marketing started in America. So there's a big history of sport agency in the United States. Firstly, the move to the US of FIFA's agent section and legal and compliance units and sections as well will, I think, have major implications going to Miami. More US-based staff or US lawyers will be employed. And also by being in America, there'll be influence of the American sport law paradigm, which is very developed. From an agent perspective, or an agent's podcast, the move to the US or the US influence will have four things at play, four themes for me. what's happening in America, like salary caps and agent fees. What you said, Jonathan, talent management is big in the USA. There's also the citizenship rules, which are different, and also compliance and privacy of information. In the USA, we have salary caps as well. We have luxury taxes in some leagues, and some, as you mentioned, Jonathan, agent fees are fixed or monitored by the Players Association for that sport. And I think FIFA will be exposed to this more closely, I would say. Now, you mentioned that FIFA tried to base its argument on what's happening in American sports in terms of agent fees. I just want to go briefly what they're talking about there. In terms of the NFL, National Football League, the agent fees are typically structured as percentage of players' earnings from the contract with the team. So very similar to what FIFA were doing in the FFAR. The standard fee set by the Players Association, not by the NFL, is 3%, but agents are allowed to negotiate their fees with their clients. However, the competition in that area sometimes pushes the fee down to 1.5% because the wages are high. So 1.5 of a big salary is quite high, but it's still a very low fee. Now, this is what you mentioned, only applicable and what FIFA mentions to the players' earnings from the club or franchise contract, and that endorsement deals and off-field ventures are outside that. NBA, huge sport, basketball, they're not allowed to charge more than 4% commission on players' salaries. Major League Baseball doesn't have those limits. Although you can say it's a 5% commission if you're charging in Major League Baseball, the contracts are huge. Some contracts are 300 million. You can make 15 million on that contract. Different set of circumstances. And I think FIFA's probably been influenced by that because we have a salary cap environment or a fee cap environment in the US. And this, as FIFA gets more exposed, may have an influence on how they see not just FFAR, but other matters going forward. Now, in terms of the agents world, when we look at MLS, they have international slots, and FIFA has certain rules about international players. In MLS, I believe it's 8 international slots for players on a roster. But FIFA's got a stricter view of citizenship or when someone can play for a country, etc. Whereas the US has a little bit different. You can be a citizenship, you can have legal resident status, or you're a refugee or have asylum status, and you're seen as an international player. It's not just a citizenship thing. So the issue of FIFA's strict nationality is a bit different as well. Also, minors. We know that FIFA is very strict with minors under 18. We know we've got the European exemption 16 to 18 for players who have an EU passport to go between states. However, in the US, if you're a minor, say 14, 15, automatically at 16, you become American according to, say, the MLS rules, and you can join a club. It's a little bit different. So we've got some different influences that could affect FIFA going forward. And the last point is compliance and privacy. North American big leagues, the Major League Baseball, the NFL, National Football League, the National Basketball Association, they allow a lot of discussion and data about salaries, salary caps. Now, we know that in privacy and confidentiality and what's going on with player contracts is not that freely available in Europe. So there's another difference there. And the last point, talent management. You mentioned it. We see in the US, it's huge. Even in college sports, you've got the name, image, likeness issue where college athletes now can earn income from sponsors. And then you've got professional players who can have huge endorsement opportunities. So we know that FIFA exempts other services from the caps and that wants agents to take advantage of this offering as talent management as they manage athlete commercial affairs. And anything to do with sponsorship, endorsement, career counseling, social media, data services, family assistance, any of that is outside the cap. So these things, what happen in the US, I think will influence FIFA a lot more. And also the FFAR, Jonathan, because as you are in that space, you'll see how the Americans are doing it, and that could feed in and change the whole paradigm of how FIFA sees not just the football business, but the agent business.
But with that as well, as you've rightly pointed out there, it is like comparing apples and oranges. It's totally different, and there's so many nuances, even between the different American sports and these aspects. And it's all very well to think you can switch the light on and off on a set of regulations and totally shift everything. But surely it's an evolution of those regulations over time. And as he touched on, there are a few other factors to consider here as to where the FIFA now has that growing US influence and US mindset rather than the arguably historic European one. Then again, it should have been a worldwide mindset a long time ago as a world governing body. There's obviously the 2026 World Cup fast approaching and the American investments in football around the world, as well as the growing US soccer market. But also, one other element that you briefly mentioned, and we've mentioned in previous episodes, and something that I'm curious about with FIFA and the US influence is that movement of the legal department for FIFA, which includes the agents department, to Miami. And I think that's this year. Albeit they seem to be hemorrhaging a lot of knowledge, experience, and talent from their legal department, given what seems to be a lot of resignations of people who don't want to relocate, it would seem. And there was one of those we noted in the last week or so on LinkedIn of somebody very prominent and known within the agents division. Needless to say, I think this loss of knowledge is something for us all to worry about, as we need a bit of certainty and support from the perspective of agents with regulations and licensing. But this relocation, combined with all the other legal challenges and rulings of recent times on various matters, not just FFAR, led me to think that maybe FIFA are also hoping to align themselves more to US law rather than Swiss law and European law, which has been in the case in the past. Or possibly give themselves a basis to steer towards whichever legal framework may suit them better, depending on the circumstances. Now, I've said this to a few people, of which some lawyers were skeptical. Is there actually a CAS element to this, the Court of Arbitration for Sport? In that if CAS had a seat for hearings in the US, any appealings to a CAS ruling would then go to a US court, as the seat or the location of the hearing would be in the US rather than the likes of the Swiss Federal Tribunal for hearings in Lausanne in Switzerland. After all, Swiss law and the Swiss authorities haven't always been in FIFA's corner as much in recent years as they have been in the past. But all in all, as a non-legal professional, with the relevant case looming and a judgment there, this could see a huge shift for FIFA's approach to regulations and governance, including agents and FFAR, or it could well backfire on FIFA.
Well, it's interesting you say that because CAS has two decentralized courts, one in Sydney, Australia, and one in New York City, USA. But they may be used more for Olympic sports, not so much football. So that is quite an interesting issue you raise. Now, the impact of the move to the US, I think FIFA also wanted to dictate some terms themselves. When they gave the World Cup, the upcoming World Cup, to the US and Canada and Mexico, they told the United States that there'll be no discrimination for anyone who wanted to enter as a tourist into the country in 2026. And that was important. And the USA, I think, gave that assurance. So FIFA does have influence in some ways with the US authorities. Now, as we said, most of its legal department's moving to Miami, but also FIFA's taking a global view. We know they've opened satellite offices in South America, in Africa, and Asia. France got the clearinghouse, or the bank that's behind the clearinghouse. So there has been quite a bit of changes. But the USA has a very strong sports law jurisprudence. And for them, the future of sports law is not just about sports. It's about technology as well, and society, as well as policies and practices that affect sports. Now, I know I mentioned New York City and CAS. That's more the doping, match fixing, athlete eligibility, and other sports related disputes. Basically, resolution of disputes affecting Olympic sports, which the Court of Arbitration has. But it's a very interesting thing you raised, Jonathan, because will more crossover happen in the football space now? That's the important issue. From CAS, will they be hearing more football matters in New York, for instance? Will the law get influenced, or the CAS law get influenced by the American sports law, which is quite unique and very big on college sports, technology, and also antitrust, which we mentioned in relation to agent fees, and also the Relevant case. So very, very interesting time how the US, who's already we talked about clubs, we talked about agents buying agencies, now jurisprudence or legal side. So very interesting times ahead.
Just when we needed it to get even more confusing, hey? But enough on FIFA and the US, at least for now. We've been distracted a bit, of course, again from the agents angle, and it's time to try and get back on track. So we have a couple of articles just to finish this episode on from more of an agent's perspective.
Yes, sorry if we sort of sidetracked and went a bit legal here, and also CAS and but the move of FIFA, especially the agents department to the US, has going to have an impact. There's no doubt about that. The way they deal with agency and the whole agent space. So we had to go. The Relevant case also has big impact as well because it's not just going to be about promotion of games, but what power the United States Federation has, USSF, and FIFA in the American space. And that's why we needed to cover these issues because there are implications long term. But I just want to go into an article, and I found quite interesting from March this year. Agent Diamani expects major changes at Napoli, and it's on tribalfootball.com. It's Agent Oscar Damiani. He expects major changes at Napoli. And what piqued my interest in this article was the focus of what influence some agents can have at big clubs. He said it's not Spalletti's, who was the former coach of Napoli, and it shows. The team has gotten worse. That many changes haven't helped. It's not like you change coach and solve the problem. Something was certainly wrong. And this is the line that really got my interest, Jonathan. He said, revolutions lead nowhere. The same changes are to be expected. Today, some agents matter more than football directors. However, I expect a great waltz from A to B. Interesting wording. And obviously, he must have mentioned it in Italian, and this is now in English. But today, some agents matter more than directors. This point of view is interesting because it signifies for me the power of many top agents have as influences on big clubs and football departments. Some of them know how to change teams and understand club culture. For agents going forward, and especially agents who are really involved in clubs and really want to work with clubs, there are three important takeaways from just that quote, seeing an influencer agent. That if you want to work for a club, you've got to know the club culture and the going-ons. Know the football department dynamics. Who is making the decisions? The yes to the contract, yes to the offer. The playing philosophy and what the agent can provide solutions to, and also a background or inside information on which players seem to be aimed to be moved on or to be renewed. So really, these are things that it's not just about representation of the player, but we mentioned club agents, and there's a different fee, 10% for club agents in the FFAR. I'll be suspended. The key is knowing the clubs as well. And this article for me signifies the influence that agents can have, the way it was termed in a little bit of a funny way, with clubs.
Quite often we skip these stories. We don't feature these stories like this in these small articles because quite often they're a bit of a non-story and it's either an example of lazy journalism or someone looking for a quote and an agent actually thinking they are the story. But that's not the case here. Are people really interested in what agents have to say, almost akin to a pundit? In all honesty, I don't think they're that interested, or if they are, they don't trust what an agent says anyway. For me, when it comes to players or clubs, a good agent does the job for the client and gets on with it behind the scenes. It's rare you hear George Mendes comment on such matters and speculation. And as we mentioned in a past episode, how Rafaela Pimenta actually deflects such speculation about her players rather than feeds it. And yes, it's true that the likes of Rafaela and George Mendes do arguably matter more than some directors, as is quoted in that article. But they are the pinnacle of the agent's world. And they're a very, very small fraction of that agent's world. And the player is nearly always the one that matters the most, not the agent or the director. That's my own personal opinion. There are at times when the agent needs to come to the fore to defend a client or explain a situation. We've seen it with Jonathan Barnett, with Ivan Toney, and also Victor Osimhen's agent come to the defense of his client on matters that had undertones of racism. In this case, I think it's a matter of an interview where some key quotes have been taken a bit out of context. But quite often, when agents comment in the media, and we discussed this a bit with Matt Slater from The Athletic back on episode 15, whether it be quoted or anonymous, you have a journalist who's after a scoop or a quote or an agent with an ulterior motive. Is the motive that they want to speculate on their client moving, if only to get a contract renewal? Or are they trying to unsettle another agent's client? And when we research these stories for the show, we often leave stories out because of an agent commenting, because they're either unnamed or an unconnected agent to the story. And I have a list of agent names who are well known for repeatedly commenting on matters, and I don't even consider an agent story if it has their name attached. Needless to say, Mr. Damiani is not one of those names. Hence, we're covering it and the important things he's got to say.
Look, I see it a bit maybe more in Italy than say in England, but you see it in England as well. A bigger profile for agents, quotes from agents, agents trying to deflect and protect their clients, but also agents using the media to promote a player, to promote a story, to promote the biggest word that we tend to use a lot these days, a narrative. And sometimes some very colorful or nice language can really, encapsulate what's going on. And agents are influencers because they want, not saying the limelight, but they want the profile and they want to be able to give views of how clubs or players are doing and also what's going on looking forward in the transfer window or what deals are in place or going to happen. So we're part of the ecosystem, and everyone says, and you mentioned Matt Slater, it's all about the transfer window. It's all about the transfer market. Well, every transfer market that comes on in the media, agents are also involved. And you hear the media say it. Pundits say, I spoke to the agent or this agent close to the club. I hear that a lot. This agent close to the club. Instead of someone in the club revealing what's going on, it's always the agent close to the club has revealed a source or this is happening. So that is happening a lot. It just shows that how important agents are. Good agents, informed agents, agents who know how to do deals and promote players, important to football worldwide and to players and to clubs, and also to make things interesting. Now, I know we got another article here, and it's entitled, I Closed the Sporting Team Without Contacting a Single Agent. It's an article in ascore.com. It's from February 2024. Raquel Sampaio, a FIFA agent, discussed the current state of women's football in Portugal. And she recalls some episodes when she was actually sporting director. And one quote caught my attention. In 2006, Raquel said, I closed an entire team, obviously contracted an entire team, without speaking to a single agent. Nowadays, that would be unthinkable. Basically, things have changed so much in the women's football landscape, Jonathan. More and more agents are representing women players and trying to create more opportunities. And also, we're seeing more investment keep growing. And I agree with Raquel. 10 years ago, 8 years ago, there wasn't much agents involved in the space. Now, every player, male, female, or most players, unless they do their own deals or are a bit older, have some agent or someone speaking on their behalf.
Yeah, I think it's reminiscent of what Maria Carlson de Checo shared with us on a previous episode of the Agents Angle. And this is also someone who's done all the roles she talks about. Raquel's been a player, she's been a sporting director, and now she's an agent. And more than likely, at some point along that journey, that career, she's been a coach at some point. So she's very qualified to comment on this. But nobody can argue, as we've covered on past episodes, how quickly the women's game has grown in recent years and continues to grow and develop at such an astounding rate. So it is expected with that more agents become attuned and focused on the women's market. And what happened, if not 7, 8 years ago, even 3, 4 years ago, there's far more agents involved, there's far more influence as the market continues to grow. So I think this is a really important observation from somebody who's been there, done it, and bought the t-shirt. Before we close this episode, we do hopefully have a show coming up in the next couple of weeks that will look at agent associations, as there are quite a few, both globally and located regionally around the world. And many agents, both new and established, are asking questions as to who they should join and who best represents their interests. And whilst we've had representatives of the likes of TFF, PROFA, and indirectly IFA and the African Agents Association on the show as guests already, we will be looking at, amongst other things, who the various associations represent, their values, their structure, and the benefits they offer to their members. And while some associations have been timely and responsive and forthcoming with the questionnaire we sent to them, we are still waiting for some to answer those basic questions so that they can get a fair representation here on the Agents Angle. And if they don't respond, we will just have to use what resources we have and some keen investigative skills. So hopefully their websites are up to date at the very least.
Yes, always looking forward to future episodes. But before I round off the show, please note later this month, on the 17th of April, the African Football Agents Association Conference is on in Nairobi, Kenya. If you're interested in that, we can definitely point you in the right direction, as well as the Football Forum in Budapest, Hungary begins on the 23rd of April. For those attending both events or one of those events, good luck with those and good luck to the event hosts. And good to see in different markets, Africa and Hungary, bringing different agents together and football business people as well. Thank you to our listeners for all the feedback we are getting. Please like us on LinkedIn and Instagram. We hope to feature further interesting guests and also possibly a special round table with agents in the future. Bye from me.
Yes, everyone, thanks for listening. And until the next time, please do take care.
The purpose of the Agent's Angle podcast is to provide news, information and facilitate discussion on regulatory matters, policies, business trends and issues affecting football agents worldwide. The opinions and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only and should never be considered legal or professional advice. Furthermore, the views expressed by guests are their own and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Thank you for listening.